Let me say something that might make people uncomfortable. Canada is acting like it can have it both ways. It wants America's protection, America's market, America's military umbrella, but it also wants to deepen ties with China, the same regime that threatens global security, expands military influence in Asia, and challenges Western dominance globally. And the worst part? Canada is doing this while standing right next door to the United States, the country that has helped shape Canada's prosperity, security, and modern economic system for over a century. So today, we're going to talk about what this really is. That raises serious questions. Let's not pretend we don't know what China represents in modern geopolitics. China is the world's largest industrial emitter. China is aggressively expanding its military capabilities. China is engaged in strategic competition with the United States in technology, trade, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, naval power, and global infrastructure influence. This is not paranoia. This is open strategic doctrine. China has made it clear it intends to expand its global influence and reduce American dominance. That is the reality of the 21st century. So, when Canada signals warmer relations, expanded trade, and deeper economic cooperation with Beijing, it's not just commerce, it's positioning. And positioning matters. Recently, Prime Minister Mark Carney met with President Xi Jinping in Beijing. Both sides emphasized expanded economic cooperation, deeper trade discussions, and long-term engagement frameworks. From Ottawa's perspective, this is diversification. From Washington's perspective, this is hedging inside an alliance. And that's where tension begins, because the United States and Canada are not just neighbors. They are historically intertwined at a level few countries in the world are. Let's rewind history. During World War I, North American production surged, but World War II is where the foundation was permanently set. The United States became what President Franklin D. Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. American industrial output exploded. War contracts flooded factories. But this wasn't isolated to American soil. In 1941, the Hyde Park Declaration formally integrated U.S. and Canadian war production. Supply chains were unified. Manufacturing was coordinated. Resources were shared. Factories in Ontario and Quebec expanded massively. Canada became one of the world's top industrial economies almost overnight. This wasn't temporary growth. This permanently modernized Canada's economy. The war accelerated Canadian industrial capacity decades ahead of where it would have otherwise been. That integration with American industry reshaped Canada forever. Then, in 1940, came the Ogdensburg Agreement, signed by Franklin D. Roosevelt and Canadian Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King. It created the Permanent Joint Board on Defense. This was historic. It formalized continental defense cooperation. The United States committed to defending North America as a unified security space. Canada gained long-term military stability under the umbrella of American power. That agreement became the backbone of modern North American defense. Then in 1958 came NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Joint radar systems, shared early warning networks, missile detection infrastructure, airspace monitoring. Canada did not need to build an independent nuclear deterrent. The American nuclear umbrella indirectly protected Canadian territory. That structure still exists today, and it is largely funded, powered, and maintained by the United States. That's not criticism. That's structural reality. Then came the post-war economic order. Even though Canada was not a direct recipient of the Marshall Plan, American reconstruction of Europe stabilized global markets. European recovery increased demand for Canadian raw materials. Exports surged. Global trade expanded. The American-led financial system strengthened the global economy. Canada benefited from that stability. In 1965, the Auto Pact transformed Canada. The Canada-US Automotive Products Agreement integrated auto manufacturing across the border. Ontario became a manufacturing powerhouse. Wages rose, factories expanded, supply chains locked together. The Canadian middle class grew significantly. Then in 1994 came NAFTA. Trade barriers dropped further. Manufacturing and energy sectors expanded. Exports surged. Today, roughly 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States. That is not symbolic. That is dependence at a structural level. And when NAFTA transitioned into the USMCA framework in 2020, that integration continued. Canada enjoys privileged access to the largest consumer market in the world. This access is not automatic. It is political. After 9/11, when American airspace closed, Canada accepted more than 200 diverted U.S. flights in Operation Yellow Ribbon. That was solidarity. But what followed was deeper integration. Border security coordination intensified. Intelligence sharing expanded. Continental defense tightened. The relationship became even more structurally interlocked. Then, in 2008, during the global financial crisis, the U.S. Federal Reserve extended liquidity swap lines to central banks, including the Bank of Canada. This stabilized North American markets. The U.S. dollar system anchors much of Canada's financial security. Wall Street shocks ripple north. Federal Reserve backstops matter. So when you zoom out, the picture becomes clear. Canada benefits from the United States in three fundamental ways: security umbrella, trade access, financial stability. That is the structural backbone of modern Canada. Now, to be fair, this relationship is not one-sided. Canada fought alongside the United States in Afghanistan. Canada contributes to NORAD. Canada invests in Arctic security. Canadian soldiers have stood shoulder to shoulder with Americans in global conflicts. This is not a one-way dependency, it is interdependence, but interdependence creates expectations, and that's where this becomes uncomfortable. Because when you rely heavily on a partner for security, trade access, and financial stability, and then you expand cooperation with that partner's primary strategic rival, it creates tension. From the American perspective, it feels like this: Canada wants the benefits of deep alliance, without fully absorbing the strategic costs of that alliance. Because the world is shifting, US-China rivalry is intensifying. Supply chains are being re-evaluated. Technology sectors are being restricted. Semiconductor exports are controlled. Military posturing is increasing in the Pacific. This is not a neutral era. This is a competitive era, and competitive eras force clarity. So when Canada deepens trade talks with China, Americans ask, if strategic conflict escalates, where does Canada stand? Will Canada prioritize American alignment or economic leverage from Beijing? Because you cannot indefinitely balance between two rival great powers. History shows that. Middle powers that attempt to hedge eventually face pressure from both sides. That's the gamble. From Ottawa's perspective, diversification reduces vulnerability. From Washington's perspective, it introduces uncertainty, and alliances are built on certainty. This is not about emotion. It's about risk calculation. The United States has treated Canada like family for decades. Family in geopolitics is rare. Shared border, shared defense, shared supply chains, shared intelligence. But when one side begins exploring deeper ties with the other's chief competitor, that trust erodes quietly, not dramatically, quietly. And in geopolitics, quiet erosion is often more dangerous than loud confrontation. Canada does not have to be America's subordinate, but it does have to recognize the structural foundation of its prosperity, the industrial modernization of World War II, the defense guarantees from Ogdensburg, the nuclear umbrella through NORAD, the market integration of the Auto Pact, the trade access under NAFTA and USMCA, the financial backstops during crises. This is not ancient history. This is living architecture. So when Canada strengthens ties with China while operating inside that architecture, Americans ask, is this diversification or is this drift? Because alliances are not just geography. They are alignment, and alignment requires prioritization. Canada can trade globally. Canada can diversify markets, but it cannot pretend that US-China rivalry does not exist. It does, and it is sharpening. So the real question is not whether Canada is independent. It is whether Canada understands the strategic expectations that come with interdependence. You can build prosperity inside an alliance, but you cannot build that prosperity and then empower the system that seeks to weaken that alliance. That is where the word betrayal enters the conversation, not as an accusation of evil, but as an expression of strategic discomfort. Because when trust is foundational, ambiguity feels like disloyalty. Canada stands at a crossroads in a changing world. It can continue deep alignment with the United States, the country that shaped much of its modern economic and security architecture. Or it can attempt to balance between rival powers in an increasingly divided global system. But what it cannot do forever is pretend that those choices carry no consequences. In geopolitics, drift has a cost, alignment has expectations, and great power competition does not leave room for permanent ambiguity. Canada can make deals with China, but it should understand something clearly. When you build your modern prosperity inside one alliance, you cannot strengthen the rival of that alliance and expect trust to remain untouched, because in the end, trust is the most valuable currency between allies, and once it begins to erode, rebuilding it is far harder than protecting it in the first place. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time, here, where money and nations shape the history.